Norwegian skies, February 1944. 40 below zero. The air rings like glass. I shove the throttle forward, but the engine coughs, deep, metallic, wrong. The temperature needle slams red. Behind me, a Messerschmitt dives, spitting green tracers that stitch the clouds. My canopy flashes with each burst. The P-47 shudders, then roars, a wounded animal trying to climb. "Come on, Boar," I whisper, "breathe." For a second, she doesn't. The prop slows. The cockpit goes silent except for the hiss of oxygen and my pulse hammering against the mask. Then, impossibly, the engine steadies. The gauge drops back to green. The roar returns. The German overshoots, vanishing into fog. I climb, alive against every rule of physics. When the radio crackles back to life, I don't answer. I'm staring at the dials, calm, steady, obedient, as if nothing had ever happened. "How the hell didn't you burn up?" I whisper. I won't find the answer up here, above the frozen clouds. It's waiting below, inside a hangar buried in snow, where one man broke the rules and taught metal how to survive. England. December, 1943. Wickham Field Air Base, 52nd Fighter Group. Rain eats metal, salt eats men. The hangars breathe rust. Every morning begins the same, the smell of glycol, wet wool, and cigarettes crushed into mud. The manual says, "No field modifications without engineering authorization." That line is gospel to the officers. They quote it like scripture, even as they watch our aircraft bleed coolant across the tarmac. Reality says otherwise. Engines overheat. Pilots burn. Paperwork continues. Command counts sorties and losses, we count graves. I'm Sergeant Roy Haskins, Line Chief. My job is to keep the 47s flying no matter what the manual says. We've got 21 operational Thunderbolts on paper, but on most days I'm lucky to see 12 leave the ground. The rest sit half disassembled, their bellies open like corpses in a morgue. It rains without pause. Fine mist, endless, crawling into every socket and bearing. When the wind shifts from the channel, salt rides with it, and every engine begins to corrode from the inside. You can smell it, sweet, metallic, a kind of death only mechanics notice. We work with gloves so thin they tear on the first bolt. When the weather drops below freezing, we heat tools in a drum of burning avgas just so our hands won't weld to the steel. The pilots complain about cold cockpits, we live inside the cold. The officers walk the line at dawn, coats pressed, boots polished. They ask for numbers, turnaround times, readiness percentages, fuel reports. None of them bend low enough to smell the antifreeze leaking into the mud. To them, every problem has a form, every failure a reprimand. To us, problems have sound. A bearing that hums too high. A cylinder that knocks a half-second late. The difference between a flying machine and a dead one is often the thickness of a fingernail, and the man holding the wrench. They don't understand that an airplane is alive. That it breathes through its ducts, sweats through its radiators, dreams through its vibrations. They think in regulations. We think in resonance. Sometimes I wonder how many of them know what happens when a P-47's turbosupercharger locks up mid-climb. The cockpit turns into a furnace. The oil cooks. The canopy fogs white. The pilot has 20 seconds to throttle down before the whole block seizes. If he panics and keeps climbing, the magnesium parts catch fire. Nothing extinguishes that. Not even snow. But the manual stays the same, printed in ink that never saw rain. Last week, one of our boys, Lieutenant Larson, came back with the underside of his cowling blackened like it had been through a furnace. He said the gauges went red halfway over the channel, then steady again near the coast. We called it phantom heat. The engineers called it pilot error. I called it something we hadn't understood yet. The truth is, the Thunderbolt's a miracle on paper and a headache in metal. The R-2800 engine pushes out 2,000 horsepower, but it runs hot. Too hot for the thin English winter air. The airflow through the belly scoop can't keep up at high manifold pressures. The coolant stalls, the temperature spikes, and we lose another aircraft before breakfast. Command tells us to replace the thermostatic valves. We've done that. To check the intercooler shutters. Done. The results stay the same. They say, follow procedure. I say, procedure doesn't fly at 30,000 feet. When I sign the maintenance logs, I always pause at the line marked, defects, none known. That's the biggest lie on this base. Every plane has a secret waiting to K*LL the man inside it. At night, after the noise dies, I sit under the wing of one of them, #43-3289, a plane the pilots call Wild Boar. I listen to the wind moving through its ducts, the way it hums along the seams. There's a note in that sound, faint but wrong. Like a trumpet with a split mouthpiece. I can almost hear where the air stops flowing. The others think I'm superstitious. Maybe I am. But machines talk if you stay quiet long enough. The trick is deciding when to answer them, and when to ignore what the book says. Because up there, the book can't hear a man scream. Before the war, I fixed tractors. Montana plains, flat, wind-bleached, endless. My father's farm sat 10 miles from the nearest paved road, and half the year the horizon was dust. We weren't poor, just patient. When something broke, you fixed it yourself or it never worked again. That was the first rule I learned. By 16 I could strip a Continental engine blindfolded. I knew the difference between good steel and tired steel by touch. The way a wrench vibrated against the bolt told you more than any gauge. My father said I listened to machines the way preachers listen to God. Maybe that's why he called me the Whisperer. We had a shed full of half-alive equipment, a 1931 McCormick tractor with a cracked manifold, a thresher whose belts shrieked like crows. My job was to keep them moving. Every dawn I'd light a fire under the oil pans so they'd turn over in the cold. I'd sit with my ear to the engine block, eyes closed, tracing the rhythm of the pistons like a metronome. A dull note meant fatigue. A sharp one meant alignment. A missing beat meant death. When the Depression ended and war rumors started, recruiters came through town promising steady pay and travel. I didn't care about travel. I cared about engines. The Army Air Forces offered both. I enlisted in '41, just before Pearl Harbor, thinking I'd end up in a workshop somewhere stateside. Instead, they sent me across the ocean to England, to the rain, the fog, the sound of aircraft coughing on cold mornings. My wife, Ellen, stayed behind in Billings. She writes twice a month on stationery that smells faintly of soap and wheat fields. I keep one letter folded in my pocket until the paper goes soft around the creases. Don't freeze inside your machines, she wrote once. She knew what she meant. Out here it's easy to let the noise become your heartbeat. Some nights, when the hangar lights flicker and everyone's gone, I read that letter again. The words settle into me like warmth from a small stove. Then I slide it back, roll up my sleeves, and listen for the next complaint from a Thunderbolt. I never went to college. Never learned theory, only consequence. Out here that matters more. A man with a degree knows how things should work, a mechanic knows why they don't. People think war is decided by pilots and generals. They don't see the men underneath, bent over turbines at 2 in the morning, fingers black, lungs full of exhaust. We live between regulations, not heroes, not cowards, just necessary. I remember my first engine fire on base. A rookie lieutenant ignored the temp gauge on takeoff. The plane lifted 50 feet, stalled, and came down in a blossom of orange. They told us not to take it personal. But I had signed the maintenance line on that bird 12 hours earlier. You can't wipe that off. Since then, I've trusted my ears more than any report. Every vibration tells a story, sometimes a warning, sometimes a secret. If you're patient, the truth hums right through the metal. I still use the same wrench I carried from Montana. The handle's worn smooth, the edges blued from heat. It's the only tool that never lies. When I tap it against a cowling, I can tell if the skin stretched too thin or the bolts are sitting proud. The younger mechanics laugh, say I treat airplanes like horses. They're not wrong. Both will K*LL you if you stop listening. Ellen once asked, in one of her letters, if I ever name the planes. I told her no, names make you soft, but that's not true. Each one has a voice, and I know them by sound. Wild Boar growls at idle, June Bell purrs until she climbs, merry and rattles in crosswind. They all talk to me, in their own ways. Sometimes I dream I'm back home, tuning the old McCormick while snow falls outside. The engine catches, steady and strong, and I hear my father's voice saying, "You listen long enough, boy, you'll hear what's coming." He was right. War or not, machines still tell the truth. And lately, the truth sounds wrong. It started with the cold. England's winter crept into everything: hoses, seals, lungs. By late December the ground was a sheet of black ice, and the Thunderbolts were coughing themselves to death on every climb. At first, we thought it was bad fuel. Then water in the lines. But the numbers didn't fit. Cylinder pressure fine. Manifold pressure steady. Yet every time a P-47 went nose up past 10,000 feet, the temperature spiked like a fever and the pilot throttled back, swearing he smelled fire. I watched it happen a dozen times from the ground, those heavy silver beasts climbing into cloud, their prop wash leaving ribbons of vapor, then a sudden sputter, a drop, a desperate arc back toward the field. You could hear it, the moment when airflow stopped singing through the duct and started choking. So I began listening closer. After shutdowns I crawled beneath the fuselage, hands numb, flashlight clamped in my teeth, staring into the intake throat. The surface inside was rough, pitted from salt and rain. You could feel the air dying in there. It wasn't the engine's fault, it was starving before it ever burned a drop. I wrote it down: air starvation in lower duct. Radiator airflow stalling under high-altitude climb. I filled the form, stamped my name, sent it through channels. 3 days later it came back, same form, red ink across the top, no action. The senior tech, a man who measured truth by how many stamps it carried, laughed when he saw my face. "You're hearing ghosts, Haskins," he said. "Follow the manual." I wanted to tell him the manual couldn't hear what I heard, the way the duct moaned when the throttle opened, the hesitation between intake and combustion, like a breath held too long. But I said nothing. Talking too much gets you grounded. Instead, I kept notes. Temperatures, manifold pressures, fuel-air ratios. Every night I compared them under the dim yellow light of the maintenance shack. The pattern was clear as frost. Every failure started with the same symptom: temperature rise during climb, followed by a drop once the plane leveled. That meant the airflow was collapsing, not the coolant. Still, the officers shrugged. Isolated incidents, they said. Operator error. Then the crashes began. First was Lieutenant Brenner, south of Norwich. He radioed engine fire, bailed out at 8,000. Second was a recon bird, never came back. The wreck was found a week later, nose buried in a field. The belly scoop looked cooked from inside, metal warped like wax. That was enough proof for me, but not for them. To command, cause of loss, was mechanical fatigue. Paper has no ears. I tried once more, walked the report to the engineering office myself. A captain there, crisp uniform, pencil-straight mustache, didn't even look up when he said, "You're not cleared to theorize, Sergeant." That word, theorize, stuck in my teeth like grit. Back in the hangar, I stood under Wild Boar again, staring at her intake. The paint was blistered where the airflow turned against itself. I tapped the metal with my wrench, heard a dull thud. Dead air. That's when I knew, the design was fighting physics. But orders were orders. No field modifications. No unauthorized alterations. You logged the issue, you waited for someone stateside to invent the fix. In peacetime that might work. In war, it gets men K***led. The night Brenner's wreck came in, I helped unload what was left of it from a flatbed. The nose was burned through. The radiator duct had folded like paper. I touched the metal, it was smooth as glass from heat. Someone nearby whispered, "He never had a chance." I didn't sleep that night. I sat on an oil drum outside the hangar, watching frost crawl over the wings of grounded aircraft. The wind made the loose panels hum. It sounded like a prayer, or maybe a warning. The book said wait. The machine said move. And in my gut, I felt it, the first crack in the rule that kept us alive. The manual doesn't fly. January came like a punishment. Snow, ice, silence. The kind of cold that makes metal ring when you touch it. We lost 2 more aircraft that month, one to flak, one to the sky itself. The second was Eddie Malone. Eddie was my friend. We'd shared a tent back in Connecticut during training. He used to carve tiny dice out of brass shavings when the nights got long. Said it calmed his nerves before a sortie. He flew June Bell, a solid bird with clean pressure lines and perfect gauges. Or so I thought. On the 14th, he took off before dawn. I watched the P-47 roll down the slick runway, prop biting through fog, exhaust glowing blue. He gave a quick salute through the canopy as he lifted. That was the last time I saw him alive. Half an hour later, radio chatter caught a fragment, engine hot, needle pegged, can't, then static. They found what was left of him near a frozen meadow 10 miles east. The wreck came back on a flatbed 3 days later, wrapped in canvas stiff as armor. I pulled the tarp myself. The air intake was scorched black. Same place, same pattern I'd been warning about for weeks. The duct walls were blistered, inner seams twisted inward like something had imploded. Not fire from fuel, fire from suffocation. The colonel called it unavoidable mechanical failure. I called it murder by obedience. That night, the hangar was empty except for me and the echo of wind through the rafters. I sat under wild boar, wrench in hand, staring at the same flawed design that had cooked my friend alive. I ran a gloved finger along the weld seam, felt the burrs, the uneven ridges that trapped air instead of guiding it. I tried to picture the airflow in my head, the rush from the belly scoop, splitting around the radiator, bleeding heat, exiting smooth. But I could see the flaw clear as frost on glass. The air wasn't accelerating, it was folding back on itself, building pressure where it should have bled away. A man can only watch death repeat so many times before he stops taking orders. I kept hearing Eddie's voice from that last morning. He'd laughed when his gauges flickered. Said, if she wants to burn, let her burn warm. He didn't mean it. None of us did. But the plane listened anyway. I walked the flight line until dawn, engines frozen under sheets of ice, wings stiff as tombstones. Every aircraft looked the same, every one carrying the same flaw. You could almost hear it under the cowling, a faint whistle, like breath catching in a throat. When the officers showed up, I handed in another report, thicker this time, pages of readings, sketches of airflow, revised duct angles. I quoted their own manuals back to them, line by line. The captain barely skimmed it. "We appreciate your enthusiasm, Sergeant," he said. "Now get back to assigned maintenance." Enthusiasm. That word stuck like a splinter. That evening, as snow began to fall again, I stayed in the hangar long after lights out. The others had gone to the mess. I sat on a crate of spark plugs and stared at Eddie's burned duct lying on the bench. I could smell the aluminum oxide, sharp and dry. For the first time since the war began, I felt something crack inside, not grief, not rage, something colder. Clarity. I realized that every man on this base was following a book written for an engine that had never felt European winter. That the rules we worshipped were written in warm offices by men who never heard what dying metal sounds like. If I kept obeying, more would burn. The decision didn't come like thunder. It came quiet, steady as breath. Stop waiting. Start fixing. That night, I cleaned my tools, checked the rivet G*N, laid out scrap sheets of aluminum scavenged from a wrecked Wellington bomber. I wasn't sure yet what I would build. Only that it wouldn't be by the book. Out beyond the runway, I could still see the faint orange glow from Eddie's crash site. It looked like a lantern guiding me forward. I whispered to it, not as prayer, but as promise. "Your last fire won't be wasted." The storm did the talking for me. Snow came sideways off the channel, flattening sound, erasing the runway lights until the world was only white and wind. Flights scrubbed. Officers gone. The hangar doors shuttered on their rails like teeth in a jaw. I stayed. #43-3289, Wild Boar, waited on chocks, her skin cold enough to burn. I ran a palm along the belly and felt the wrongness in my bones, the way a man feels weather coming in his scars. The intake throat glared back, ragged welds, seams proud, corners that caught air and folded it into heat. I unlatched the belly panel. The fasteners squealed, old corrosion, winter's handwriting. A floodlight threw a pale oval across the concrete, and in that light the duck's insides looked like the gullet of a tired animal, rough, pitted, starved. No blueprints. No permission. Only the line I would not cross again, obedience that K** led. From a wrecked Wellington behind the scrap fence I'd already salvaged a stack of thin aluminum, good temper, straight grain. I hauled 3 sheets in, set them on sawhorses, chalked arcs the way my father taught me to lay out plow steel, measure from the curve you need, not the edge you're given. I bent the metal over my knee and a sandbag, slow, steady, until each piece took a shallow, continuous radius. A new throat. A guide for breath. I stripped the duct, cleaned the scale with emery, chased burrs with a file, wiped everything down with warm solvent until the metal smelled like nothing. The floodlight hummed. Wind pressed the doors. Somewhere outside a loose cable clanged the same note, over and over, like a metronome counting out courage. I offered up the first piece and held it in place with klecos. The curve kissed the old skin perfectly, no steps, no pockets. I marked rivet spacing with a machinist's wheel, tight where the pressure would peak, looser where it could bleed. Then I drilled. Each hole was a point of no return. Each shaving spiraled bright, fell like snow beside my boot. I buttered the seams with a thin smear of high-temp sealant, wore paint nobody would ever see, then set the rivets. The G*N barked, the bucking bar answered, and the new throat stitched itself into the airplane. Every hit felt like a verdict, live, live, live. I added a shallow splitter vein just upstream of the radiator face, not a wall but a finger to teach the stream where to go. No sharp edges. No sudden decisions. Air hates to be surprised. I taped the joints and access hatch with doped fabric to K*LL leaks I could not see. I polished the interior with rag and oil until my reflection blurred in a silver river. I checked clearances with a strip of lead sheet, cycling the shutters by hand, listening for any kiss of metal on metal. None. The movement was clean, smooth as a well-tuned throttle. I resafetied the fasteners, wiped my prints from the cowling, and closed the panel. The new skin lay quiet, purposeful, like a healed scar. On the bench, Eddie's burned duct watched me. I set my palm on it for a moment, cold, lifeless, and then on Boar's belly, cold, but waiting. I thought of the manual's black letters and the space they never leave for winter, grief, or the sound steel makes when it wants to live. I rolled the heater drum under the engine and turned it low to keep the oil from turning to glass. I wrote nothing in the logbook. The blank line under alteration/remarks stared up at me like a question. I closed it. Outside, the storm had softened to a whisper. The airfield lay buried, lights smothered, barracks windows dim as distant ships. I locked the hangar, pocketed the unauthorized templates, and walked the line once, counting silent aircraft by touch. At the door I paused and listened. The wind through the rafters had changed pitch, lower, smoother, as if the building itself approved. I imagined the first climb, the first green needle that stayed green, the first breath that did not turn to fire. Rules keep men honest. But tonight, the snow taught me something the book never will. If you want an engine to live, you must first teach the air where to go. Morning came gray, flat, and merciless. The storm had emptied itself but left the world frozen in silence. Every footprint on the ramp was a fossil. Breath turned to powder. Tools clanged brittle as glass. Lieutenant Danny Rhodes arrived with coffee gone cold in his hand. 23, Kansas boy, the kind who grinned before takeoff and prayed afterward. His Thunderbolt, wild boar, stood gleaming with frost, hiding my crime under polished aluminum. He slapped the cowling with his glove. "She ready, Roy?" I nodded once. My voice wouldn't move. At 0900 hours, he rolled out. The prop cut a clean white spiral through the air. The Pratt & Whitney caught after 3 blades, a deep steady roar that trembled the hangar glass. I stood in the doorway, engine heat licking my face, and watched her taxi down the strip. No one else knew what had changed beneath the belly, no one but me and the storm that had kept the secret. Takeoff smooth. Wheels up. Then nothing but the distant hum fading into altitude. We waited. Mechanics always wait, between sound and silence, between life and telegrams. I pretended to work, checked pressure gauges, wiped frost from another engine, but my ears strained toward the radio shack. At 26,000 feet the static broke. "Temp steady," Rhodes said. 28, still green. A pause. "Feels like a brand new bird." No cheering, not yet. We'd all heard hope lie before. But the voice stayed calm, confident. Climbing to 31, power holding. I exhaled through my teeth. The others looked at me like I'd conjured weather. When he landed 40 minutes later, the cowling was cold to touch. Cold, after a full power climb. I cracked a drain plug, oil ran amber and clean, no burnt smell. Rhodes pulled off his gloves, eyes wide. "Whatever you did, Sergeant," he said, "she's breathing easy now." The news spread in whispers. The maintenance chief asked for my logbook. I handed it over blank. He frowned, saw nothing to reprimand, and moved on. But among the crews the word grew like heat: Bohr doesn't overheat anymore. 2 days later Rhodes flew escort over Bergen with the 52nd. They met a pair of Messerschmitts above the fjord. High altitude, -40, air thin as glass. Rhodes outclimbed both, something no Thunderbolt on base had done in months. He reported, engine smooth, boost steady. He dove, turned, sh*T1 down, and came home with the others' smoke still trailing over the sea. The squadron gathered as he taxied in. Frost dusted his wings, G*N barrels steaming. He popped the canopy, laughter fogging the air. "She didn't even pant," he said. Someone in the back muttered, "He taught her how to breathe." That night I sat alone by the heater drum, oil rag in hand, pretending to polish wrenches. My hands shook. Not from guilt, not from fear, just release. The machine had lived, and the man inside had too. But success is noise, and noise draws attention. By morning, pilots were requesting the Cold One, Rhodes's ship. Some asked what was different. I shrugged, said we'd rebalanced the shutters. Lie enough times and it almost becomes truth. By the end of the week, command noticed the pattern. 6 sorties, no overheating. Power curves improved by measurable margin. Fuel efficiency up. Maintenance down. In an army of paperwork, even silence becomes suspicious. Captain Wills cornered me in the hangar. "Haskins," he said, "what are you doing to that plane?" "Maintenance, sir." "Same as always." He studied me a moment, maybe hearing what I wasn't saying. Then he nodded slowly. "Keep doing it." The next day he assigned another Thunderbolt, #43-3307, for routine servicing. His way of giving me permission without the paper trail. I spent that night repeating the process by lantern light. By dawn, there were 2 breathing birds. Within a week, 5. Pilots started comparing notes on engine temp the way men compare luck. The phrase caught on, "A Haskins machine runs cool." I never wrote a word. Every rivet was a confession, every flight a test. When Rhodes walked past me in the mess hall, he just tapped 2 fingers to his temple and said, "Whatever you did down there, keep doing it up here." I wanted to tell him it wasn't magic, only air and faith in disobedience. But I kept quiet. Engines don't care about medals or rules. They only care about breath. And for the first time in months, the Thunderbolts of Wickham Field were breathing again. 3 days after Rhodes's flight, inspectors arrived from Group Command. They came in a jeep that smelled of starch and authority, wearing gloves too clean for winter. One of them, a major with a voice like dry paper, walked the hangar line, clicking his pen against the fuselage skins as if the sound itself could reveal guilt. He stopped beneath Wild Boar. His eyes traced the belly scoop, the smooth rivet pattern that broke factory spacing by half an inch. Tiny differences only a man with frostbitten hands would notice. "Who authorized this modification?" he asked. No one spoke. The hangar hummed with silence. Air hissed through the draft gaps like breath through teeth. Finally, I stepped forward. "No one, sir," I said. "I just wanted her to live till morning." The major squinted at me, then at the aircraft, then back. "You altered structural geometry without clearance." "Yes, sir." "Why?" "Because the men flying them don't have time to wait for Washington." He wrote something on his clipboard, short, sharp, the kind of note that usually ends a career. Then he turned to leave. Before he could, Rhodes burst in from the flight line, helmet under his arm, still half covered in frost. "Sir," he said, breath visible, "I flew that machine at 31,000 yesterday." Temps held green. "She fought and came home because of that man." The major didn't answer. He just looked at the two of us, one regulation, one rebellion, and exhaled. "Get back to work, Sergeant. We'll settle this later." That later never came. Instead, the colonel called me in after dark. His office smelled of pipe smoke and damp maps. He didn't stand, just studied me over his glasses. "You know what you did was outside every rule we have," he said. "Yes, sir." "And you know what happens to men who improvise without authority?" "I read the manual, sir." He smiled, small, tired. "Then let me tell you something not in the manual." He leaned forward. "That plane of yours climbed faster, burned less fuel, and outlasted everything else in the group. Whatever you built, it works." He set the pen down. "Officially, you're reprimanded for unauthorized modification." Unofficially, he looked at the ceiling, as if speaking to the ghosts of every pilot who hadn't come back. "Keep breaking the rules, the right way." He signed a sheet, folded it, and handed it to me. "This stays in my drawer, not your file." When I stepped outside, the wind had died. The snow on the tarmac glittered under a half-moon. Engines slept under canvas like beasts after battle. I stood there a long time, listening to the hum that wasn't there, the silence of machines finally at peace. Next morning, orders came from Maintenance Command, 2 P-47s to be transferred to Republic Aviation for inspection of field performance variances. I knew what it meant. They were coming for my secret. While the trucks loaded the planes, I ran a hand along Wild Boar's fuselage one last time. The metal was smooth, faintly warm from the sun. I whispered, "Breathe easy, girl." Rhodes came up beside me. "They'll tear her apart, won't they?" "They'll learn from her," I said. He laughed quietly. "You ever think you might have changed the war?" "No," I said. "I just stopped it from K*ling the same way twice." That night, the hangar felt larger without bore inside. The empty space echoed like guilt and pride sharing the same body. The younger mechanics kept asking if the stories were true, if I'd really cut open the ducts, if Command had really thanked me. I told them it was all rumor. They nodded, pretending to believe me. Later, when the lights dimmed and only the frost lamps burned, I opened my notebook and drew what I'd built, every curve, every rivet spacing, every angle the air seemed to love. I didn't sign it. The lines were enough. The next morning, a memo appeared on the bulletin board. Effective immediately, evaluation of improved radiator ducting configuration, P-47 airframes. No name. No credit. Just the quiet proof that disobedience can become doctrine. I went back to work, grease under my nails, tools in hand. Nothing changed, except everything. For the first time since Eddie Malone burned, the cold inside the machines began to thaw. A week later, the trucks came back. Not for punishment, this time they carried engineers. 3 of them, fresh from Republic Aviation, their boots still too clean for Wickham's mud. They brought blueprints, clipboards, and curiosity. The youngest, a bespectacled fellow who kept blinking against the cold, introduced himself as Merton. "We're here about your, inlet geometry, Sergeant." My stomach tightened at the word your. Nobody had said it aloud before. They rolled Wild Boar's twin sister, #43-3307, into Hangar 2. Panels came off, gauges went on. They measured airflow with instruments I'd never seen, thin brass tubes that hissed and ticked like crickets when the compressor blew air through. They filled notebooks with numbers, tracing lines on paper the way we traced frost on wings. I stood nearby, hands buried in pockets, pretending not to exist. Merton finally looked over. "You really did this without a drawing?" "Didn't need one," I said. "Air doesn't read blueprints." He grinned, half admiring, half terrified. "You know you've achieved partial Meredith effect?" I shrugged. "If that's what they're calling breathing, then yes." For 4 days they worked, photographs, smoke tests, pressure readings. When the last session ended, Merton approached again, shaking his head in disbelief. "Your curve reduces drag and keeps the pressure gradient stable. We've been trying to do this in the factory for months." I didn't know what to say. So I said nothing. By February, a telegram arrived. Republic engineers had approved the modification for mass production under a new designation, Model W, for inlet. A small note at the bottom, origin, field adjustment observed at Wickham Field. That was all. No name. No credit. But the sound of that phrase, field adjustment, felt like victory carved in frost. When the new Thunderbolts rolled out weeks later, the difference was obvious even from across the line. The scoops gleamed smooth, seamless, proud. Pilots ran their gloves along the metal like men touching a living thing. Someone painted on one cowling, in small red letters, Haskins' breath. I pretended not to notice. The war didn't stop for innovation. Missions still flew, men still didn't come back. But the numbers shifted quietly. Engine failures dropped. Fuel efficiency rose. Climb rates improved enough that squadron reports started using new words: sustained, stable, trustworthy. Command called it a mechanical refinement. The pilots called it a miracle. At night, the hangar changed tone. The metallic whine that used to haunt the ducts was gone, replaced by a low hum like contentment. Even the tools felt lighter in the hand. Mechanics stopped flinching when aircraft throttled up, they trusted the sound again. When news came that Germany was cracking, nobody celebrated. We were too tired. But on one of those thin spring mornings, I watched a formation of Thunderbolts climb clean into the sun, no smoke, no trailing coolant, only contrails, white lines of breath across the blue. For the first time, I believed the machines wanted to live. After the surrender, I was offered promotion. I refused. I'd had enough of ranks. I signed discharge papers, shipped my tools home in a wooden crate, and took the train west until the air smelled like soil again. Montana hadn't changed. Same fences, same wind. I opened a small repair shop by the highway, tractors, harvesters, the occasional pickup. Some nights I'd stand outside, listening to the big engines rolling down the interstate and imagine them breathing through my curve. Ellen and I grew old in the house her father built. She kept my wrench on the mantel, the one worn smooth by 1,000 rivets. When reporters came through town after the war asking for stories, I said nothing. Machines don't need applause. Years later, a letter found me. Postmarked Dayton, Ohio. Inside, a short note from Danny Rhodes. At the Air Force Museum, they've restored a P-47 with your intake. Underneath it, a plaque reads, "To Sergeant Roy Haskins, the man who taught metal how to breathe." I read it twice, folded it carefully, and placed it beside Ellen's old note, "Don't freeze inside your machines." The shop clock ticked. The wind moved through the open door, dry and gentle. I could almost hear it, the low, perfect hum of air finding its way home. I wasn't an engineer. I wasn't a hero. I was just a mechanic who stopped obeying long enough to listen. And in that listening, the world learned to breathe again. 20 years later, winter again. The shop quiet except for the ticking stove and the smell of oil that never leaves wood. The postman brings a package, small, careful. Inside, a photograph, a P-47 restored in silver, its belly gleaming under museum lights. Beneath it, a plaque reads, "To Sergeant Roy Haskins, the field mechanic who outsmarted the Luftwaffe's best." I sit by the window, snow whispering against the glass, and set the photo beside Ellen's old letter, "Don't freeze inside your machines." Outside, the wind hums low through the fence line, same pitch as a well-tuned engine. I close my eyes and let it fill the room. I wasn't an engineer, I whisper. I just taught metal how to breathe. The clock ticks once more, steady as a propeller at idle. Then only silence, clean, living silence.